I want to introduce first Lucas Bechtol, who is with the Bryan Times, and Lucas agreed to do an interview of two of our top physicians in Williams County. So I would like to introduce Dr. Glen Seaman, who is with Parkview Physicians Group, and I'll ask him here in a minute how long he's been a family physician, but he has been a family physician. He is currently also the Williams County Health Department's medical health director. So Dr. Seaman, how long have you been a family physician?
I've been a family physician for 21 years now, Bill.
Fantastic, 21 years. So thank you for being here this morning. And I also want to introduce my very good friend, Dr. Park, who is a family physician, obviously, with Parkview Physicians Group. But he is also the Williams County coroner, so he is not someone you want to run into in the middle of the night. You can help it. And he's also a medical director of various nursing homes in Williams County, and so we're happy to have him. So Dr. Park, how long have you been a family physician?
I've been a family physician since 1992, 29 years.
Fantastic. So we have 50 years of experience sitting across the table here in terms of being family physicians or medical directors. And I'm gonna make one comment, and I'm gonna step aside and let Lucas, kind of take over the interview. But the comment I want to make is that, we have kind of a good news, bad news scenario developing in Williams County. The good news is that we're moving down in our cases per 100,000 residents. We're currently at level 2, which is still orange. We're knocking on the door of level 1, which is yellow, and that's where we want to get to. We're currently reporting about 109 cases. That's 109 cases per 100,000 residents, and we got to get below 100. That's what we're trying to get below, and we've been trending that direction, and that's the good news. Everybody's still trying to do the right things. The bad news is when it comes to a COVID-19 vaccine, we're really trailing the state and national averages in terms of folks getting vaccinated. We're trailing about 10 percentage points behind adults over the age of 18. So in the United States and in Ohio, just over 50% of adults over the age of 18 have received the COVID-19 vaccine. In Williams County, that number is 40.5%. So we're trailing by almost 10 points. And that's a little bit concerning because we do not want this thing to come back in the fall, because that's probably where we're headed. We have to have more success getting people vaccinated. So I wanted to pull this interview together to share information about the vaccines. And I asked Lucas, who is one of the youngest reporters at the Bryan Times, to come in and ask some questions. So it's going to be kind of an open conversation with Lucas's questions. But before we start, everybody in this room has been vaccinated fully, and we waited our 2 weeks. And because of that fact, we're going to take our mask off, because for us, things are getting back to normal. This is going to be a normal interview like we would have done pre-COVID, and it feels so good to take that mask off. And that's one of the benefits for getting vaccinated. So I want to do this, Lucas. I want to ask the physicians if they want to make any opening comments to start, and then roll it to you for questions. How's that?
Sounds good.
Kevin, why don't you go first, if you don't mind?
So we are here today because we are, I think I'm speaking for Glenn in this respect also, that we're dedicated to making a difference in our county, in our country, and in the world at trying to reduce the spread of COVID-19 and reduce the associated hospitalizations and death. And we think the most important part of that process is getting as many people as we can vaccinated against it. So we want to come here today to share some information that might help someone who is on the fence about whether they want to get it or not. and we want to share some information that might change some minds, might reassure some people, but certainly share some facts that will lead everyone to believe that there can be an end to this and there can be a return to normalcy again. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I agree. I'm very passionate about the COVID vaccination. There's great science behind it. There's great efficacy. I think that it's important for people to understand from a medical perspective really what the COVID vaccine can do, as well as other vaccines that we've had in this country. It's very similar. The purpose of vaccination is to end disease. And from a medical perspective, it's important for people to understand that. This is not something that is a political move. This is medical, this is health, and it's important for people to have that understanding from physicians, not necessarily what people may hear in the media, on social blogs, or so from physicians, from the CDC, from the health departments, that's people's best source of information about the vaccine.
One concern I know a lot of people have is that it's a very new vaccine. It was rushed, or at least a lot of people seem to think it was rushed. I know a year ago people didn't think we'd be able to get a vaccine this quickly. So with all that, how is this vaccine safe?
So I think we would want to address that from the standpoint of, number one, that mRNA vaccines were being trialed for the last several years and for quite a long time, but there was no human phase 3 trials that were accomplished until COVID hit. When COVID hit and people started dying, then the sense of urgency took place. So on a national level, with the CDC and the FDA and the institutes that go through the process of trying to achieve vaccination trials, things take time. But the urgency of people dying expedited the whole process. From a government stimulus, from scientists getting their heads together, from task forces put together by our former president, etc. I think that things took place in more of a hurry because of the concern about people dying. Normally the process of processing paperwork and steps in between phases of trials take times while people analyze and say, well, what are we going to do here? What are we going to do there? But I think some of that red tape or some of that process was made faster for the sake of trying to save lives. Once the trials began and the good outcomes were seen, then the emergency use authorization was applied for because lives were being saved. So I think emergencies and life-threatening situations require that we respond accordingly.
Kevin, I think the public responded accordingly too. One of the other reasons that this vaccine came out so quickly and was given the emergency use authorization so quickly is because the amount of people that received the vaccine in the clinical trials happened quickly. Normally with vaccines we've seen in the past during development, that may take 3 to 5 years to enroll enough tens of thousands of people to volunteer to take that vaccine to test it within those clinical trials. People were afraid of COVID, as they should be, and people were lining up and volunteering to test this vaccine. So really the numbers are no different in the patients and people that volunteered to test this vaccine. I think that's worth saying, and that was one of the prime reasons this was able to be developed so quickly. And you hit on the secondary reasons. It's not new technology. We're blessed in this country with some of the best scientists, with some of the best manufacturing drug companies. Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, they've been making vaccines for years. They know how to do it, and we're blessed that they could respond to this pandemic in a timely fashion.
Let's talk about side effects. That's another issue that people have. What kind of side effects are there to this vaccine, and especially what are some of the long-term effects, and can we even know what the long-term effects are at the moment?
Well, the immediate effects within the first 24 hours are usually, with the first vaccine of the two mRNA vaccines that we're mainly talking about today, the Pfizer and the Moderna, are soreness at the site of the injection, and then over the next maybe 1 to 2 days, development of more body reaction symptoms, including achiness, sense of fatigue, maybe fever, and just general malaise or feeling bad. For the most part, fevers, when they do occur, resolve within about 24 to 48 hours after injection. Rarely, there have been people that are more prone to develop allergic reactions or anaphylaxis, which is a severe airway allergy type of reaction. Those have occurred at a rate of about between 2 and 15 out of 1 million. So it's a very low frequency of more severe allergic reaction. Nobody has died from anaphylaxis with this. Most of them have not even been hospitalized. Most of them have been taken care of by Benadryl and epinephrine. So that number for true allergy is very low. And for the most part, as we were talking about the other symptoms, they're fairly well tolerated. I might defer to Glenn to see if he's read anything about any longer term side effects from the vaccines. I don't think we know of any severe or long term side effects from the vaccines at this point. But
No, and I think it's when you look at the vaccine and you look at the ingredients, and I've read the ingredients list on all the vaccines. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is a single dose vaccine, is really very similar to vaccines a lot of us have had in the past. It's a vector vaccine. The ingredients are the same, other than the fact that the inactivated virus in the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the vector, is carrying a new protein in our body for our immune system to react to. That's the spike protein from COVID. So the vaccine is very similar otherwise to vaccines a lot of us have had in the past, in terms of ingredients, in terms of stability, in terms of safety. So we really shouldn't expect any long-term vaccines, even though we've only been giving this one for now about 3 to 4 months. And likewise with the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, the ingredient list is very pure. It's sodium, potassium chemicals that are used as preservatives to keep the vaccine stable in our body and to keep it stable before it's delivered to the body. These are, from a biochemistry standpoint, and I was a biochemist doing protein chemistry research before I was a doctor for 3 years in a lab in New York City. And to me, these chemicals are things that we have in the body anyways.
Glenn, what about ethylene glycol? Or
it's polyethylene glycol.
Okay.
Polyethylene glycol is the principal ingredient in Miralax, which is a safe drug on the market that we prescribe for people with constipation and to help your bowels. So PEG, polyethylene glycol, is really the only ingredient that is recommended that with the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, anyone who has had any type of allergic reaction or abnormal reaction to polyethylene glycol shouldn't take that vaccine. But that would be very, very rare.
And these, none of these vaccines will give you COVID, from my understanding, correct?
That is correct. If I may want to draw a picture showing something here. So, and there's the other concern, widespread misinformation about this somehow affecting our DNA.
Yeah.
So if we have a cell and then a cell nucleus here, and then let's talk about how this enters the body. So we inject the mRNA vaccine, COVID vaccine, into the arm, and the mRNA is covered by a lipid coating to make it more stable in the body.
And lipid is just a fat coating.
Correct. And then what happens is macrophages come along, and let's say this is a cell that's a macrophage, we call it. Macrophages are bigger cells in the body that, I spelled that wrong, macrophage, that they're gobbler cells. So it's going to gobble up this lipid fat layered mRNA. Once it gobbles it into the body, then there are parts of the cell called endoplasmic reticulum with ribosomes on them. The cell chews up or digests the lipid layer, and then the mRNA gets attached to the ribosome on the endoplasmic reticulum, and then that mRNA is the code for the spike protein. Have you seen the pictures on your news station of the COVID-19 ball?
Mm-hmm.
They all
It looks
have,
really scary.
looks
Yeah.
like a dog's ball with these rubber tentacles sticking out
Yeah.
from it. So it kind of looks like this, and then there's these spikes all over coming out. That's the spike protein. So the mRNA codes for the spike protein, and then these macrophages then start producing the spike protein, which then layers them, and then these macrophages circulate through the body to the areas of the body that are responsible for the immune response, specifically liver, spleen, bone marrow. There, the body has a twofold mechanism to fight the vaccine. The first is the production of B cell antibodies. So we call that a humoral response or antibody response to the vaccine, to produce antibodies against these spike proteins, which are circulating and then can attack the virus if it gets into the body and tries to layer or tries to attach to cells. The antibodies are the first way of our body's defense mechanism. The second way is the helper T cells. The helper T cells help as killer cells, and they also release what's called cytokines, which cause other white cells to come, which now have both recognition and potential to kill or digest the viral spike protein, making it less effective at killing our cells in our body.
So Kevin, I'd like to add, so in answer to your question, Lucas, no, these vaccines cannot give you COVID, because we are not putting a coronavirus, COVID virus into the vaccine that gets injected into the body. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine delivers the spike protein, okay? So then the immune system takes over reacting to that. The mRNA vaccines, which are the Pfizer and Moderna, again, are delivering mRNA, which is the recipe, in simplistic terms, the recipe for the body, our own cells, to naturally do the work and to make the spike protein. Okay? Once that recipe is read, the body doesn't need it anymore. mRNA goes away. It's basically torn up. So with that being said, mRNA does not incorporate into DNA.
It doesn't even.
It does not change our DNA. It's read, the recipe is read, we remember it, and it's torn up. And this folks, is if we can remember that long ago, the younger people probably can. My daughter actually told me about this whole process. I knew it, but this is something that our kids learn in 9th grade biology.
Well, this is really fascinating to me because, I mean, there are a lot of words in there that I would probably never try to say again. But this is like a relatively simple process.
Absolutely, Bill.
It's really not that complicated.
No.
Other than the long words that you were saying, Kevin.
And just the process itself, staying away from the nucleus, is reassuring to me.
Right, right.
So if I'm healthy, I'm young, that's really not a whole lot of comorbidities, not a whole lot of issues in terms of COVID generally. Why should I get vaccinated?
So I think the most important thing to get across to young people who, for the most part, are less at risk of severe consequences of the COVID is that we want to convince them that they can be either mildly symptomatic or asymptomatic vectors of the virus. And by a vector, we mean something that can carry it and be a contagion to something else or someone else, a loved one. So if you lived in isolation and weren't around your friends, your family, your grandma or your grandpa, or you never visited someone over the age of 65, then you might be able to isolate yourself. But we don't live in an isolated world. We live in a very social world. We're very social people. And the concern I have, the one I've tried to get across to our young folks in particular, is that we want to help protect your grandma in the nursing home when you go visit her. Or if you work in a nursing home or hospital, we want to protect the people that you're trying to take care of by getting you to a point of immunity so that you no longer can be a vector.
That's very important, Kevin. The number one reason to get vaccinated is protect yourself, okay? Even young people, they may have milder symptoms, but that's still, you're sick, even if for 3 days, okay? It may be comparable to a flu for a younger person, which if you've ever had the flu, it feels like a truck hit you. High fever, you're achy, you're down. You don't want to leave your couch, okay? And then what we've seen through this pandemic is if you're sick with COVID, you shouldn't leave your couch. You can't go to work. You shouldn't be out in public because we don't want those people spreading it, okay? If they don't get any severe consequences, yes, they get over it, but they're still out of work for 10 days in quarantine period. So that's, if we can protect ourselves from that, even the younger people who are less likely to die. But again, it's very important to protect those around us and loved ones. Hence the quarantine period we've all known to hope it doesn't happen to us. Mm-hmm. And the other reason for young people to get vaccinated is when you're vaccinated, if you are alerted that you've been exposed to someone who has had COVID, that quarantine period doesn't have to happen. you can feel safe that you're protected, and you can still be out in public, you can still go to work, you can still be around people without having to spread that. And that's actually important. I know school's ending now, but through the summer, and hopefully we can end this pandemic by the fall if enough people get vaccinated. But now we have a vaccine that has been approved to administer to individuals 12 and up. And those are generally our middle school and high school age group. Both of my children have been vaccinated, and that was their choice. And one of the reasons they're involved in sports and activities, they did not want to risk having to be exposed to someone who had COVID and then have to be out of their sport or their activities or miss school events because they were home in quarantine. And the CDC recommendations are if we're fully vaccinated, we don't have to be quarantined. We're safe. That's very important for young people, especially that younger age group that's in school.
And that's a really important point for employers to understand, because I was confused when I heard Governor DeWine was dropping all the health orders, next week. I think it's June 2nd. And I just thought that meant things like contact tracing and quarantine, and all that was going away. But that's not going away. There's still going to be contact tracing. You could still be quarantined if you're exposed to someone with COVID. And a lot of the government programs for like quarantine pay, they're going away, like they're expiring. So you could end up in a situation with 10 days off of work, unpaid, because these quarantine programs have gone away. So it's just something to keep in mind. If you're fully vaccinated, that's just another thing you don't have to worry about.
That's a great point. So with any vaccination, there's still a risk of getting the disease, but if we do, it's going to be a much milder form because our body can already recognize that virus and attack it harder. 95% efficacy is outstanding. I don't think we've ever had a vaccine in this country or world that's been showing data of 95% efficacious in preventing the disease, the virus or bacteria that's designed to prevent. The other advantage of the vaccine is that efficacy expands when the greater population gets vaccinated. That's called herd immunity. Herd immunity is when a large proportion of a population is vaccinated. So, for example, we have a room of 100 people. Okay, if 70 to 80% of those people are vaccinated and the virus enters that room, it has a less chance of infecting 20% of unvaccinated people, which is 20, versus if only 10% of that room is vaccinated, 90 people are at risk. And then when those people leave those rooms, they're spreading it. That's why we're in this pandemic. So if we can establish herd immunity in this country, which means more and more people get vaccinated, this virus, COVID-19, peters out. We saw that in the 50s with polio. Okay, polio does not exist in this country because a large portion of the population was vaccinated at that time, virtually everyone, and the virus petered out. Okay, but even the polio vaccine at the time was not 95% effective. People were still getting polio until that actual herd immunity happened. And that's what's going to get us out of that this pandemic. Otherwise, the virus will continue to circulate in our communities, in our country, in our world, until it actually mutates. And we've all heard about some variants, and we don't want that to happen.
So just to add to that, there are 332 million people in the United States. Approximately 80% for herd immunity would be some of the neighborhood of 250 to 260 million. We've had, 150 million or so vaccinated at this point, about 130. We've had about 40% or so that are fully vaccinated. So we need that number to be quite a bit more. We do have a certain percentage of people that have developed some natural immunity from having the disease itself, maybe 35 million or so. But then there's some overlap of people that have been vaccinated after having the disease. So that total number is probably not 180 million yet. But it's going to take another 3 to 6 months to get the number we need to get vaccinated to get herd immunity to happen, most likely. So we would still want to push for more and more people to be vaccinated.
And if we take our smaller population of roughly 37,000 people in Williams County, quick math, herd immunity would take to be 70 to 80%, probably about 32,000 people in this county. We've done a great job in vaccinating the people 65 and up, which are the highest risk population. We've reached a goal of close to 70 to 75% in vaccination in that age group. There still are some out there that can still be vaccinated at any time. And that was a population that we really started vaccinating with in the country. So they've had it available to them longer. Now that the vaccine is really available to everyone 12 and up, we're not seeing those numbers in the younger population, but they are part of the global population. So when we talk about that 70 to 80% number to develop herd immunity, we need that younger population to be part of that. And it's good citizenship.
Yeah.
How good is the vaccine against the variants?
So I would just mention, go back to my picture, and we do believe that the T cells in particular are helpful in the immunity against the variants still. So at this point, number one, we don't believe, I haven't seen any data indicating the variants or the mutants of the virus are more deadly. And number one. Number two, I haven't seen any data to suggest that the vaccines that we do have, we believe that the vaccines that we do have are effective against the mutants.
So in simplistic terms, we take this ball with the spikes on it, that's our spike protein. A variant is a mutation in the virus, in the viral code. So a mutation is either an addition or deletion in what that, say, spike protein looks like. So let's say we have 20 spikes. We take away one, that's a mutation deletion, or we add one to 21, that's a mutation addition. Okay, it still looks similar enough to our immune system that the immunity that the vaccine induced can still recognize that spike protein. Okay, if this virus continues to mutate, okay, and let's say develops 5 or 6 mutations over the next 2 to 3 years, now we're looking at, say, 25 spikes. That looks quite a bit different. Our immune system can no longer recognize that. So then we may be talking about a brand new virus, not COVID-19 anymore. A mutated coronavirus called COVID-25. And we could enter a whole new pandemic. So if we can establish herd immunity and all be vaccinated, get this virus to peter out, that's much less likely to happen. The virus isn't there, has no one to infect, stops mutating. And
this, what he is describing here is what exactly is happening with the influenza virus every year. And it's why we get essentially a different, and why we get a yearly update of our influenza vaccine, because it does mutate and it does change and it does cause our immune system to stretch it. And so getting another shot in the arm will help prevent that next year from us not having immunity to the current influenza variant that we have out
So a
there.
lot of people have asked me, Kevin, will we have to get boosters against the COVID virus? So will the people who have already been vaccinated need a booster shot at some point? Currently, the data is showing that, I mean, some people have been 6 months out from their vaccine now. I'm close to 6 months out. And data from the original vaccine recipients is showing that, yes, they still have immunity. Okay. We don't know what that will look like in a year. Will we still have immunity in a year? These vaccine manufacturers will let us know that, okay, going back and testing the initial vaccine recipients. So that's to be determined. We may need a booster, we may not. We may still have that immunity. But the hope was that if, again, I'm going to go back to herd immunity, if we can get this virus to peter out and it's not circulating anymore, then no, we don't need a booster because there's nothing to boost us against. The virus isn't there in our communities anymore. We don't have to worry about getting sick from something that's not out there. And you made
Smallpox is an
Yeah.
example of that.
You made
We don't get vaccination. Our kids don't get vaccination for smallpox because it's essentially been eradicated from the world because there was nobody out there for over a period of 10 to 20 years that developed smallpox because everyone had been vaccinated worldwide. So,
But if we do get more mutations, the fact that we have this mRNA vaccine, that's a quick response time now. We just change the mRNA, we train to recognize a new virus. That can happen very quickly, but we don't want to take that chance because when I say quickly, 3 months, let's say we do get a new pandemic. We can develop a vaccine quickly, but still, a lot of people will die before that happens.
So if I did have COVID-19 in January, why did I need to get vaccinated? Or why should I have?
that's a good point. At least one article I read indicated that if your exposure to the virus itself, if you were infected, was a small viral load we mean you only got a few respiratory particles that then got into your nose and started to multiply, perpetuate, get stronger in your body. But if you got a more serious illness and your body was, extremely seriously ill, you're more likely to develop more long-standing antibodies. So the period of time for either an asymptomatic person or a person with a small viral load with very little illness might only be 3 to 6 months that the antibodies are staying with you. The vaccine itself, as Glenn was saying, we think that it's going to be, they're postulating that it might take 2 to 3 years in your body before you need a booster, if you will. So the vaccine is probably more effective than either an asymptomatic or mildly infected person at developing an immune response.
Is that why some people got COVID twice? Because that
Probably.
load was probably lower, so they just didn't have the antibodies.
Absolutely. And there have been case reports of people that do get COVID. We've been since pretty much February of last year, 2020, so now we're over a year. Yes, people have gotten COVID more than once. And some of the case reports I've read that people, especially younger people, it's worse the second time around. So the effects of the virus are worse because it's hitting the immune system harder and causing more of an inflammatory response. So in order to avoid that risk, it's even for people who have had COVID, it is worth vaccinating to develop that longer term immunity in hopes.
Going back to the side effects of the vaccine, there's some concern with pregnancy. People are worried about infertility. What do you know about those issues and what should happen in that situation?
So there was some stuff that came out several months ago. There was a German scientist that postulated this, and it got some momentum that let's say you have a pregnant mother and you have a fetus and then you have placenta. The placenta has a protein called syncytin 1. And syncytin 1 had maybe a few sequences that were similar to the spike protein. And one article I read likened it to having a 10-digit number and having 17 in this 10-digit number and 17 in this 10-digit number. I'm not a virologist, I'm not a geneticist, so I don't know exactly how close these are, but I know it wasn't close enough really, and this theory has been debunked basically because there have been no changes in the fertility rates of people that have gotten COVID, the virus itself. And we don't believe that it's affected and caused more prenatal abortions or spontaneous abortions that have happened, miscarriages, if you will. So we don't think it's affected that. And plus, the V-Safe program that goes along with the vaccines is a program where we give responses to the vaccine itself. There was a certain number in those studies that Glenn was talking about of the thousands of people that signed up for it. There was a certain number, several thousand, that were pregnant. And they looked at the outcomes of those pregnant people versus the outcomes of the general population. And they saw no increased risk of miscarriage. They saw no increased risk of genetic abnormalities or malformed infants, congenital variations, those kinds of things. So we don't have any definitive data because we haven't studied pregnant people. But this is retrospective data that tells us that we believe it is safe. On a clinical basis, if you ask me as a family doc, I don't do obstetrics anymore, but I would ask a patient who was pregnant to talk with their OB about it. What I can tell you is that pregnant people who get COVID, the virus itself, infection, are at higher risk of getting serious illness. So it's a delicate decision. If I were to give advice, and this is a touchy situation, I would tell my first trimester pregnant person maybe to wait till the second or third trimester. This is the only give that I have, give in, if you will, to an unknown part about the vaccines. Glenn, you want to
Kevin,
add to that?
there was an article coming that I just read last week that is now showing data that pregnant women who are vaccinated and even women who were vaccinated before they become pregnant are passing this antibody to their baby. So the babies are being born with immunity to COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the blessing of the human body. Some antibodies, so healthy women can pass their immune system, their antibodies to their baby to help protect their baby.
Not only through the placenta, but through lactation
Yes.
also, with breast milk.
The virus has a 99% survival rate or 98%. Why even bother getting vaccinated? That it doesn't seem like it should be all that dangerous.
I mean, that is a interesting question, and it's one of what the naysayers use, but tell that to a loved one who watched their loved one die. This is one of the most emotional parts of 29 years of practice that I've had personally, and I think it's because we as physicians felt somewhat helpless with the seriously ill. and particularly the elderly. There was a time at the end of December and through January when we watched people die in the nursing home, probably 70 locally, and there wasn't a whole lot we could do for them. The shortness of breath they had, and they had something that I would call inanition. They just stopped eating and drinking. And some of that we think is because of the change in taste and the change in smell, that people just stopped being hungry because it was almost a meaningless experience for them to eat. And they just stopped, and they looked to me, some of them, like World War II pictures from, and I don't want to offend anybody by saying that, but they were cachectic. They lost weight. They lost hydration. They looked like blank faces, and it was a difficult thing to watch as people died. We've almost had 600,000 die in America alone now. That number is not insignificant. It's more than any time that we can remember from influenza. It challenges only the 1918 Spanish flu. And so to each individual family that lost a loved one, it's very, very significant.
So you make a great point, Kevin. COVID is like no virus we've ever seen in this country. It's not influenza. We know how to treat influenza. We know what to do for our patients, even when they're hospitalized. And people die of influenza in this country every year in the tens and thousands, not the hundreds and thousands that we've seen over the last year from COVID. COVID was actually the third leading cause of death in the state of Ohio last year. And now we have to look at, that's preventable, highly preventable with this tool, the vaccine, okay? We don't want to see COVID being the third leading cause of death anymore. And when you talk about percentages, you mentioned 1 to 2% die, okay? That's 1 to 2 in every 100 people die, okay? We don't have to take that risk. That's when you look at the risk of the numbers, okay, what are the risks of an adverse reaction to the vaccine? 1 in, say, 3 million. I'd rather have the 1 in 3 million risk of an adverse reaction versus a 1 in 100 risk of death. It's break that down to the math, and I'm not a gambling person, but that's not a gamble I'm willing to take. The fact that the vaccine is available, it's highly effective, it's safe, and it's widely available now to anyone age 12 and up. Ways to get the vaccine: the health department here in Williams County are having clinics almost every day. You do have your choice of which vaccine you want. They have dedicated days where they're giving out certain vaccines. Our local pharmacies, Walmart, Rite Aid. I go into Walmart, if I'm there for 15 minutes, I'm going to hear an announcement at least twice that says, we have free COVID vaccines available in our pharmacy on a walk-up basis. Go get your eggs and milk and get a COVID vaccine, folks. It's safe, it's effective, and we're protecting ourselves, we're protecting our communities.
I have a 4-part closing that I'll label in this way, and you can remember it better that way. It's safety, efficacy, return to normalcy, and emotional plea. So we know now that, and we believe that the vaccine is safe. We know of no long-term side effects as of yet, and the amount of adverse reactions are tolerable and treatable. And so we're not concerned at this point about ongoing data for problems with safety. We know of no directly causally related deaths that are connected with the vaccine itself. Yes, people have died after the vaccine, but a lot of people are going to die anyway in their lives when they are at ages where they're potentially expected to die from other causes, such as cardiovascular disease. But we don't know of any attributable to the vaccine. Efficacy, 94 to 95% effective. As Glenn said, preventing hospitalizations and deaths. We don't know of any other vaccine that's that good, so we're standing on that. Return to normalcy. Can you imagine what it's going to be like not to have to wear masks again? I mean, that would be an awesome place to be. Freedom. Freedom to run around, hug people, do what you want to do, go to entertainment events, go to sporting events, go to county fairs. That's what we're looking forward to again. More vaccines means an end to the pandemic. Emotional plea. As Glenn said, protect yourself. Protect your family. Protect your grandma. Don't be a vector. Get vaccinated yourself. Do you know famous people that have been vaccinated? This isn't something that just anyone on the street is getting or not getting. It's famous people are getting this too, like Whoopi Goldberg, all the Supreme Court justices, Pope Francis, Jessica Alba, Mila Kunis, Ashton Kutcher, Alan Alda, Harrison Ford, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Those are just a few of people that you know, that you've seen on TV, you've seen sporting events. Stephen A. Smith for ESPN. A lot of people are standing on this vaccine and believe in it as it's changing our world from what we've experienced over the last 17 months. I'm going to quote Morgan Freeman now. I'm not a doctor, per Morgan Freeman, but I trust science, and I am told that for some reason people trust me. So here I am to say I trust science and I got the vaccine. In math, it's called the distributive property. In people, it's called taking care of one another. Get the vaccine, help make our world a safe place to enjoy ourselves again. From a not so famous person, Kevin Park, get the vaccine, protect yourself, protect your loved ones, make a difference in our world today. Thank you.